At Oslo, I think in early February 2007, about 46 countries turned up. By the time we held the conference in Wellington a year later, it was more than double that number.
The Wellington meeting, the core group of countries who were running this had basically decided was going to be pivotal because we were going to adopt a declaration there to commit ourselves to go to Dublin and adopt a treaty in Dublin. So Wellington was, I think in many respects, where the rubber hit the road.
My key direct involvement was, of course, at Wellington, where I opened the conference. I was able to welcome the delegates to Parliament buildings, including the survivors that had come along, to work with the people that had assembled there, and to work alongside Don Mackay.
A number of countries that had been very ambivalent about the process and the way it was going, basically realised at Wellington that there was going to be an outcome from this process, and it was going to be a meaningful one. There was a lot of pressure in Wellington to whittle the draft treaty down, to water it down, and we resisted that very, very strongly. There was a lot of pressure on some of the smaller countries, including from the Pacific, who were hugely supportive. It was touch and go. We didn't know on the Thursday night whether we were going to get an outcome, but we did.
And Wellington put on a hell of a show, really. The involvement of the New Zealand government, the New Zealand Defence Force, and the NGO groups, the campaign. It was really a proud moment for me as a New Zealander working in the UN system to have that level of commitment from the government and all New Zealanders.
In Dublin, a number of propositions that were being made by countries, and a number of weapons that had been quite emphatically defended by countries in Wellington, when they got to Dublin, they'd given them away. This was a humanitarian convention, a humanitarian negotiation. It was not a disarmament treaty. It was not something where, you know, we sat down in a cold clinical room and sort of talked about, you know, well, we'll get rid of this sort of weapon if you get rid of another, and, you know, sort of weighing the pros and the cons. And I said, okay, well, we have the compendium, we have all these proposals for various weapons that should not be covered by this convention. You know, let's go through and look at them. You know, who'd like to argue a case in favour of excluding this particular type of weapon? You know, can I have some interventions on the floor? There were none.
We made some real progress. We wanted something that was strong, we wanted something that was effective, and we needed it to be inclusive. And getting those NATO countries on board, the United Kingdom, France and Germany, that was a huge breakthrough. When we knew that we had their support, we knew we could make a real difference.
It was high drama, very hard work, but ultimately it paid off because we got the Convention on Cluster Munitions, and we got, I believe, a very strong agreement to prohibit the use, the production, stockpiling and transfer of cluster munitions, and really strong language requiring clearance of the weapon, requiring destruction of the stockpiled cluster bombs, and requiring assistance to victims of the weapon, and framing that language as it was their right to receive assistance.
The way the definition covers cluster munitions now, they won't produce anywhere near the same scale of destruction and post-conflict clearance requirements that the current weapons, you know, have caused in the past, you know, and that is a huge step forward. You know, the result for us was outstanding, and you know, to have it a result achieved relatively smoothly with everyone walking away feeling like they were comfortable with the result was incredible.
The final stage was the signing conference at Oslo, when we joined a huge number of other governments in signing the convention, and along with the Cluster Munitions Coalition, the 7 countries that I've referred to were given pride of place.
Don played a key part, and New Zealand, I'm very proud to say, played an instrumental role working alongside our 6 other colleagues in the original group to get us to where we got in December 2008. Sadly, by that stage, I was in a different role and not able to participate in that conference.
It was, as I say, hugely satisfying to be able to sign for New Zealand. It was also hugely satisfying that it had been possible to do that because we'd just had a change in government, and that had happened immediately before Oslo, as you know, and it was great that the new government was able to move so very quickly and wanted to move so very quickly to embrace the Cluster Munitions Convention.
I introduced the bill, draft legislation, the Cluster Munitions Prohibition Bill, in July, and that was quite a momentous afternoon, I thought. Certainly for me, you know, having the lead in doing that. But it was also good, obviously, that the Honourable Phil Goff was still in the House and played such a major part. And then, of course, it's referred to Select Committee.
So in the 10 months since the Oslo signing conference, we've been campaigning for New Zealand to ratify the convention, and we understand that involves first passing domestic implementing legislation. The Aotearoa New Zealand Cluster Munition Coalition was set up to, ensure that the New Zealand government made it through the Oslo process and came out on the other end as a hero, as one of the kind of lead states that sought the strongest possible convention, as a lead state that hosted an extremely successful Wellington conference, and as a government that also looked at its neighbours in the Pacific and Australia and tried to bring them along as well. New Zealand has done all of those things.
That partnership between government and sort of NGO sector, it's been a really impressive thing from my point of view, coming on board when the convention has already been signed, but just seeing the strength of that relationship. It's always been there, but I think it has been pretty critical in New Zealand taking the lead on this convention.
It is a model where progressive governments working in conjunction with non-governmental organisations and international agencies can make some real breakthroughs. I think working on other things, specific issues where we use that technique, that may well be productive.
Ultimately, governments are the ones that have to sign the conventions and ratify and implement them, but I think we've shown that the conventions can be much stronger if the process is inclusive and if all kind of views are taken into account, not just the views of governments, but the views of the people who live in those countries, especially the ones that are affected by the weapon.
The difference between the Anti-Personnel Landmine Treaty and the Convention on Cluster Munitions is that this is largely a preventative treaty. I mean, landmines were sold and used extensively and polluted many countries around the world. Cluster munitions really, by comparison, haven't polluted to the same extent. And so what we've been able to do is pretty much outlaw prevent the same situation that occurred with anti-personnel landmines. And by forcing countries to take these weapon systems out of their arsenals before they get used, we are saving future generations and saving the heartache that a number of countries have gone through. So that's a massive step forward, and it can't be underestimated.